I moved into my son's house on a Tuesday in late October, 2 suitcases and a box of photo albums in the back of his car. My husband had passed 8 months before, and the house we'd shared for 31 years felt like a place that had stopped making sense without him. My son Daniel had called me every Sunday for 3 months after the funeral. He'd said, "Mom, we have the room. We want you here." His wife, Rachel, had even gotten on the phone once and said the same thing, so I believed them. I packed up what I could carry, and I left the rest behind. I was 63 years old. My back had been giving me trouble since the previous winter. Nothing catastrophic. Just the kind of slow, grinding ache that builds up over decades of standing in kitchens and bending over laundry baskets and carrying children who have long since forgotten the weight they once were to you. I wasn't frail. I wasn't helpless. I was just tired in the way that grief makes a person tired, and I thought that being near family would help. Daniel and Rachel lived in a 4-bedroom colonial in a suburb outside Columbus. They had 2 children, my grandson, Eli, who was 7, and my granddaughter Sophie, who had just turned 4. The 3rd bedroom was mine. It had a window that faced the backyard, and there were white curtains Rachel had hung specifically for my arrival. I stood in that room the first evening and I thought, this is going to be all right. For the first few weeks it was. I helped where I could. I picked Eli up from school on Tuesdays and Thursdays because Rachel's schedule was difficult those days. I made dinner 3 or 4 nights a week. I read to Sophie before bed when Rachel had work calls that ran late. None of this felt like burden to me. It felt like purpose, which was something I'd been searching for since the funeral. I wanted to be useful. I wanted to feel like I still had a place somewhere in the world that was made for me. I should have paid closer attention to how quickly useful became expected. By December, I was picking up Eli every day. Not 2 days a week every day. Rachel had mentioned once, very casually, that it would help if I could take Sophie to her Thursday music class, and somehow that turned into me taking Sophie every week, plus picking her up and staying the full hour because Rachel said Sophie cried if I left. Daniel had started asking me to have dinner ready by 6:30 because the kids got fussy. I didn't mind the cooking. I'd cooked my whole life, but there was a tone that had begun to appear in the way Daniel asked not a question exactly, more of a notice. "Dinner at 6:30, Mom," the way you'd set an alarm. I told myself it was just the adjustment period, a new household finding its rhythm. I told myself I was imagining things. Christmas came and I bought gifts for everyone. I spent more than I should have on the children, because that's what grandmothers do, and I did it gladly. Daniel and Rachel gave me a bathrobe. It was a nice bathrobe. I hung it on the back of my door and tried not to think about the fact that it was the kind of gift you give someone you're not sure what to do with. In January, Rachel's mother came to visit for 2 weeks. She stayed in the guest room, the room down the hall that had always been kept for visitors, and I didn't think anything of it at first. I understood that Rachel's mother was a guest in the traditional sense. She didn't live there. She'd come a long way. What I didn't expect was that after Rachel's mother left, Daniel came to me and said they needed to reconfigure the rooms. He said it in that same tone, the alarm-setting tone. He said Sophie was getting older and needed her own space, and the room I was in had better light, and there was a finished room in the basement that was actually very comfortable, he said. Very private. I stood in the kitchen doorway while he told me this. I had a dish towel in my hand. I remember noticing that my knuckles had gone white around it. I said, "You want me to move to the basement?" He said, "It's not really a basement in the traditional sense. It's a lower level. It's fully finished." I asked if I could see it first. He looked slightly surprised, as though the thought that I might have a preference hadn't fully occurred to him. He took me downstairs. There was carpet beige, the commercial kind, and a small window near the ceiling that looked out at the concrete of the driveway. There was no window that faced the sky. A folding table had been set up against one wall. The overhead light was a single fluorescent panel. I stood in that room for a long moment. I said, "Daniel, I have a bad back. The stairs are going to be a problem." He said the stairs weren't steep. He said it like that settled something. I moved downstairs 2 weekends later. I carried my own boxes because I didn't want to make a fuss. My white curtains didn't fit the small basement window, so I left them folded in a drawer. I want to be honest about something. I didn't say enough. I know that now. When you spend a long marriage being the person who smooths things over, who keeps the peace, who decides that the argument isn't worth having, that becomes the only way you know how to move through the world. I had smoothed things over with Daniel his whole life. I'd smoothed things over with his father. I didn't know how to stop smoothing just because I'd finally run out of surface to work with. Spring came. My days had developed a shape that I hadn't chosen, but had somehow agreed to by not refusing it. I was up by 6:30. I made the children's lunches. Eli wanted his crusts cut off. Sophie would only eat her apple slices if they had cinnamon on them. I drove Eli to school at 7:45. I came home and started whatever needed doing around the house. Rachel had started leaving notes on the kitchen counter. Not requests, exactly more like memos. Bathrooms need doing this week. Sophie's sheets are in the dryer. Can you remake her bed? We're out of the good olive oil. I did these things. Every single one of them. Because what else was I going to do, leave a 73-year-old argument in the kitchen and go back down to my fluorescent room? Daniel worked long hours. I understood that. I didn't need him home for dinner every night or sitting with me watching television. I wasn't looking for company every moment. But there were weeks, entire weeks, where the only real conversation I had with my son was logistical. Did I remember to call the repairman? Could I be home between 2 and 4 for a delivery? Had I picked up the dry cleaning he'd mentioned on Tuesday? I had. I always had. My back got worse in April. Not dramatically, not in a way that sent me to the emergency room, but in the steady way of something that has been asked to do too much for too long. The stairs to the basement were starting to take a count out of me by evening. I'd been carrying laundry baskets up and down all winter. I'd been bending over the children's bath twice a week since January because Rachel said the kids slept better when I did it, and I didn't have the language yet to explain that my comfort also had some bearing on the arrangement. I made an appointment with my doctor. She adjusted my medication, gave me some exercises, and told me to reduce the physical load where I could. She said it not unkindly, the way doctors do when they're telling you something you already know. She said, "You're 63, not 43. Your body is going to tell you when something is too much. The question is whether you'll listen." I drove home from that appointment and sat in the car in Daniel's driveway for a while before going inside. I thought about what my life had looked like 8 months ago. My own bedroom on the second floor, with a window that faced the oak tree in the backyard. My own kitchen where I knew where everything was, and nobody left notes on the counter. My own schedule, such as it was quiet and unstructured and mine. I missed it with a sharpness that surprised me. Grief is strange. You think you're grieving one thing, and then you realize you've been quietly grieving 4 or 5 things all along, and you just didn't have the energy to sort through all of them at once. That evening, I told Daniel I needed to talk to him. He was in the living room with his phone, which was where he usually was after dinner. I sat across from him, and I said that my back had been getting worse, and that my doctor had told me I needed to reduce the physical load. I said I couldn't keep doing the full childcare routine every day, maybe a few afternoons a week, on the days when my body was having a better time of it. I said it calmly. I said it clearly. I had rehearsed it in the car. Daniel looked up from his phone. He looked at me for a moment, in a way I couldn't entirely read. Then he said, "So what are you saying, Mom? That you're just going to stop helping?" I said I wasn't saying I'd stop. I was saying I needed to scale back. I was saying my back was a medical issue, and my doctor had told me directly to reduce the load. He said, "We built our whole schedule around you being here." I said I understood that, and I was sorry it was inconvenient, but my health had to factor into the conversation. He said, "Then what exactly are you contributing?" I heard that sentence the way you hear a door slam in an empty house. The echo of it. I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "I mean, if you're not going to help with the kids and you're not contributing financially, what's the arrangement here, Mom? You're just living here for free?" I looked at my son. I had carried him home from the hospital 38 years ago. I had sat with him through 2 broken bones and 1 broken heart, and a year after his first marriage fell apart, when he called me every night for 6 months, and I picked up every single time. I looked at him, and I thought about all the lunches I had made, and all the school pickups, and all the bathrooms, and all the sheets, and all the olive oil, and I thought, this is what it has come to. This sentence, in this living room, on this ordinary Tuesday, I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. I didn't cry, and I didn't raise my voice, and I didn't say any of the things that were moving through me at a fairly rapid rate in that moment. I said, I see. I stood up, and I went downstairs to my fluorescent room. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time that night. My back ached. The concrete outside my small window had gone dark. I could hear, faintly, the television upstairs, some show Daniel and Rachel watched after the kids went to bed. Normal sounds. House sounds. The sounds of a life that had room for everyone except, apparently, the person making the lunches. I thought about my doctor's appointment. I thought about the oak tree I could no longer see from any window. I thought about a conversation I'd had with my neighbor Beverly. Right before I moved out, she'd stood in my driveway and said, Marjorie, you don't have to go. I had laughed and said of course I didn't have to. I wanted to. I thought about that now. Beverly had a guest room. She'd told me once, years ago, that it just sat empty most of the time, and wasn't that a waste? I didn't sleep much that night. But somewhere around 2 in the morning, something in me got very quiet and very clear in the way that things sometimes do when you finally stopped pretending. I knew what I was going to do. I spent the next several days moving carefully. I didn't announce anything. I didn't start an argument. I called Beverly and asked if she still had that guest room, and she said yes, and she said it in the voice of someone who had been waiting for this phone call for a while. I looked at my bank account. I had enough, not extravagantly, but enough. My husband and I had been careful people. I had what I needed. I packed slowly, over 3 evenings, while Daniel and Rachel were upstairs with the television on. I packed the things that were mine, the photo albums, the good dishes I'd brought when I moved in, which had spent the past 8 months in the back of a high cabinet, because Rachel preferred her own set, my husband's cardigan, which I had not been able to leave behind when I left the old house, and which had lived at the bottom of my suitcase ever since, like a small, wool-shaped piece of evidence that I had once been loved simply and without condition. On the last evening, after the children were asleep, I went up to the kitchen one more time. I stood at the counter where Rachel's notes had lived for 5 months. I ran my hand along the edge of the sink. I had stood at that sink more hours than I could count. Then I took my house key off the ring and set it on the counter, very gently, face up. I did not take anything that wasn't mine. I did not leave a note. I did not need to explain myself in writing to someone who had already made clear what he thought my presence was worth. I carried my 2 suitcases and my box of photo albums out to my car. My back hurt. It always hurt now. But I stood up straight while I loaded them, and that felt important, and I held on to it. I drove to Beverly's house. The porch light was on. She opened the door before I had even finished parking, and she didn't say anything dramatic. She just stepped aside to let me in and said, "The room's all made up," and that was enough. That was more than enough. I have been at Beverly's for 6 weeks now. My back is better, not cured, but better, in the way that bodies sometimes recover when you stop demanding impossible things of them. I sleep in a room with a window that faces a maple tree, and in the morning the light comes in at an angle I have grown fond of. I make my own schedule. I drink my coffee while it's still hot. Daniel called 4 days after I left. He didn't ask if I was all right. He asked where his spare key was. I told him I'd left it on the kitchen counter. He said he knew that. He'd found it. He just wanted to know why I'd taken mine. I said because it was mine. He didn't seem to have a response to that. We have spoken twice since then. Both conversations were short. I don't know yet what will become of us, of me and my son, of his children who I love and still think about every day. Eli with his crust cut off, Sophie with the cinnamon. I think about them and I feel something complicated that doesn't have a simple name. But I know this. I am not a utility. I am not an arrangement. I am not something you assess for contribution and then decide whether to keep. I raised my children the best I knew how, and I loved them without keeping score. And I do not regret any of that, but I have learned, at 63, sitting in a guest room with good light and a maple tree outside, that love, given without limit, is not the same thing as love. It's just disappearing slowly. It's just making yourself so small that one day someone looks right at you and doesn't see a person anymore. I see a person. I have always been a person, and I am not done.